All right, everybody. Good morning. Welcome back. Hope you guys are doing well. Got a few minutes, about 2.5 until it's 9 a.m. and then we will start today's class. But good to see you guys wherever you're at, and just get comfortable, and we'll start this up in a few minutes. Eddie. Hey there, good morning, guys. Good to see you guys. Eva, Senna, Kelly, everybody feel free to say hello. Hope you guys had a good weekend. Hey, Anthony, good to see you too. Hey guys, good to see everybody. Just another minute before we get going. Hey, and he's getting so big. It's like 8 pounds already, and he's not even 6 months old. It's like already the size of my last cat when she was full grown. So I don't know how big this boy's gonna get. What's up, Eddie? Okay, almost ready. This cat, he like does this thing where he like splats out like how he's doing right now. It's such a silly boy. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. Good to see you guys. Good morning. It's 9, so hope you all had a good weekend and ready to get back into this philosophy meeting. So yeah, next week on Wednesday the first papers are due, so you still got some more time to work on that. Today, with the first part of the class, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up all the remaining leftover notes from the work of Nicholas Everett, and then that will close our whole discussion of philosophy of religion for now, and we'll start to transition to our second big course topic, which is ethics. So as usual, anyone feel free at any time. If there's any questions, comments, or anything else, let me know in the chat, and I'll take them as they come. But let's just try and review and finalize the material here of the Nicholas Everett. Okay, so just a few more words and notes about theism and modern science. Okay, Nicholas Everett, Theism and Modern Science, coming from 2004. Okay, so just a quick refresher on this. So the author Everett is trying to explore what are the tensions that lie between religion and modern science. Is there some type of contradiction between the two? If so, what is it? And why is it that so many say that science and religion don't agree? Okay, well, he's trying to make the case that there are these tensions or contradictions between religion and modern science, and it's his goal in the paper to just kind of expose what they are. So he starts off the paper by providing this kind of thought experiment, and the thought experiment is backed by like a little conceptual argument. So he gives this example, if you remember, guys, about a person who washes ashore on an island and they find themselves there perhaps on a deserted island alone, kind of like the kind of scenario given in a movie like Castaway or Robinson Crusoe or the old TV series Gilligan's Island. Of course, in that case, there's a bunch of them. But anyway, one person presumably arrives from some type of unfortunate, accident on the island by themselves. So they're wondering, is there anybody else here too? Is there another survivor that's also on the island with me? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But I would like to find out. So he says, if there's another survivor on the island, then there's certain things they'd be likely to do. And what I'll do is I'll go out in search of those behaviors. And if I don't find any such signs, then that'll give me evidence that there's no other survivor. But of course, if I see those kind of signs, then that'll give me a key to the idea that there is somebody here. So, the island example is where the person will go around looking for things that, another person might do if they were there, like have footprints or have an enclosure somewhere or some type of sounds or signals of whatever kind. And therefore, let's say he goes through the island looking for any such signs. But after he completely explores it and, looks very thoroughly, he does not see any such signs. So having now conducted the search and failed to see such signs, he's gained evidence that there's nobody else there and that he's alone on the island. Okay, now I'm not going to write the full formal argument on the board again as we did last lecture, but just to remind you about it, and you see it written on page 66, he gave this kind of argument to give structure to the example. So the argument first premise says, if there's a being with some type of nature N and intentions I, then that being will produce change C in the world. What that says in a less complicated way of putting it is, if you had some idea that some being existed with a certain type of nature and goal, then you could predict what it would do. And then the second premise says, but the world does not display C. So that would be like the equivalent of looking out for the expected behaviors that the being would have produced, but not seeing any. And then the conclusion would follow that there's evidence the being doesn't exist. So in the case of our island guy, the expected behaviors were the signs of life from another survivor. Having looked for him, not found him, he's got evidence there's no other survivor. Okay, now that kind of formal argument is what he's really going to use then to try and make this this claim that science and religion are in somewhat conflict with each other. Let me then list for you the major points that he makes about what he thinks the universe, reasonably would be like if God had created it for humans, versus what we happen to find, at least according to like a scientific analysis of the universe. So he lists the expected behaviors that the being so-called would produce in the formal argument that changes C as the apt behavior. Apt meaning appropriate. So like what would be the appropriate behavior or the expected behavior if this being actually did exist as we think it does. So in the case of God now, the concept is that we're asking what would an apt universe be then? In case God made the universe for us, what kind of universe would we expect it to be? So these points that I'm going to list are going to be the kind of features that Everett claims the universe would exhibit if it was really made by God for the sake of humans. So in the major world religious traditions of monotheism, and certainly within Christianity, it says that God made the universe, but he didn't just do it randomly or for no particular reason, that he made the universe, but he did it as a place for us human beings to live in. So specifically, it's a place for human inhabitation. We're not just supposed to be like some kind of random thing that evolved accidentally. According to theism, God created us in his image. We are the jewel of creation in that way. And so this universe should be made with mankind foremost in mind. Therefore, here's what he thinks the universe would have been like if it was made by God for the sake of humans. Okay, so for one, you would expect that humans would appear very early in the timeline of history. So Okay, also, I'm just going to list them all, and then we'll just briefly go through each point. You'd also expect that not only would we appear early in the universe overall, but that we would appear not long after the other animals. Furthermore, it seems as if, in case God made this universe for the sake of us specifically, then he would have made it so that we have a specific kind of central location. So we would be in the center of everything. The Earth would be in the center of the universe. The Earth would be in the center of the universe. Also, so the universe would not be vastly larger than the Earth. Okay, yeah, so here are the points made in reference to what the universe would be like in case God made it for the sake of mankind. And the reasons for that is because, like I've said, theism says that the nature of God is that he's, this perfect being who has a specific concern with humanity. He creates the universe, but he creates humans as the jewel of the whole creation. So given that information about God's assumed nature and purposes, what kind of universe would we expect to find? Well, the sort of universe described in the traditional stories of Genesis, for example, from the Bible, in which all of these features are claimed to be there. So in the traditional theistic accounts of the origins of the universe, it says humans appear very soon, within the first 7 days of creation. As you would expect, right, if the whole point of making the universe was to give mankind a place to exist. But what would have been the point of creating a universe where there's no humans there for billions of years way later? You'd also expect that human beings would appear not long after the other animals. Now, we might appear sometime after the other animals if it had been created by God, because he'd want us to have them as resources for food, for clothing, and things like that. But what would be the point of creating a universe with no humans and only animals that are non-human animals, and letting them roam around, as the things that exist for billions and billions of years until humans emerge much later? Like, why are humans the point of the whole system, arriving way later in the timeline if the point was to make the universe for them? And then also, you expect the planet Earth to be in the middle of all things, because why would we be in some type of peripheral, random, non-central position? If the universe is literally made for our sake, everything should revolve around us. Finally, why would there be all this additional space that's not capable of being utilized, accessed, or even viewed in a lot of cases by human beings? So this is what you'd expect the universe to be like, but then the point is that, at least according to science, none of these things are the case. So first of all, humanity has arrived on the planet Earth according to science, through evolution, and it's taken a very long time for that to happen. And, so maybe the current form of Homo sapiens has existed for 100,000 to 500,000 years. But if you compare that to the length of the timeline of the universe, it's something like 12 to 15 billion years. So we don't appear early in the universe. Sorry. If you wanted to make a graph visually, you'd have a 26-mile line with humanity coming into that line in the last 1 or 2 inches of the line. So we don't appear that early, according to science. Way after the other animals, even on the planet Earth. We're not in the middle even of the local cosmos. In classical early Christian church, all the way up to the medieval period, it was considered so important to say that human beings were in the middle. And people like Galileo and Copernicus were punished just for using telescopes that could verify that that's not true. And then finally, the universe is so much larger than the planet Earth. That's something that's pretty much indisputable, because we have very powerful telescopes now that show us that. So, takeaway point then by him is, this is not the kind of universe you'd expect in case it was made for man. Made for the sake of man by God. The universe, according to science, as revealed by science, is nothing like the conditions that you would have expected to see. So the universe that we see is not the kind that you would have thought God would make if he did exist. So this is the equivalent then, seeing these features not shown in the universe by science, of like looking through the so-called island for signs of life of another survivor, not seeing the signs you thought you'd see, and then concluding that there's no such thing. So that's pretty much it for Everett. Let me erase that. And I guess with that, we're closing the door then on our whole topic of philosophy of religion. Now, anybody who's reporting on the 2 different prompts, you have all the information that you need for either one now. You still have 9 days to work on it. Give me 1 second. I'm going to turn on my AC. It's kind of a little stuffy in my house right now. Just a second. Okay, thank you guys. Yeah, sorry. I can never quite tell if it's necessary or not to run the AC. Sometimes in the morning it's kind of cold and I leave the windows closed, and then it starts getting a little stuffy midway through a lecture like this, so I have to turn it on. Okay, guys, well, thanks for your patience as we got through all that philosophy of religion material. I guess somebody could argue that, like, where Pascal says there's no evidence that can be given that can prove that God either exists or doesn't exist, someone could say, well, at least according to Nicholas Everett, this isn't really true. There is evidence to prove, if someone agrees with these scientific conclusions, that there's maybe no God. But anyway, you have your options, I guess, in terms of what to use as criticisms and how to present the different authors. So anyways, let's go ahead then and move into our second big topic of this class. So we've come to the second unit now. And the second topic of this class is all about what's called ethics. I briefly mentioned the word ethics as we discussed Clifford, because his article is called The Ethics of Belief, but now we're going to get the full treatment and really go into a deep dive into another major realm of philosophy. So ethics. Okay, so ethics is really just the study of morality and moral concepts. Okay, so ethics, all about morality. Now let's get a sense from some of you guys. When you hear the word morality, this topic is, raised, what are some of the basic terms or concepts that pop up in your head? I just kind of want to get the discussion rolling on this topic of ethics. So let's see where your head is at. Like, when you've heard the word ethics, probably you've heard it at least a few times in life, what concepts strike your mind? Ethics. I'm telling you, it's the study of morality. So what is morality and ethics all about? It's all about things like, okay, good, Megan, right and wrong. What it means to do the right thing. Very good, Drew. Yes. So I'm going to put some of these, like, kind of contrasting moral concepts here. I don't need a line, actually, so I'll erase that. But anyway, things like this, right and wrong. And Drew, the way you said what it means to do the right thing. So I guess I could put it as how one should or should not act. That's kind of similar to the way you put it. Right, wrong, what you should and shouldn't do. Any other kind of synonymous pairings that kind of resemble the terms right and wrong? You could say right, wrong. You could also say blank and blank. Like, what's another way of putting those things while we're on the topic? I think we can come up with a few more. Some say good and evil, right, or good and bad. There's, okay, moral versus immoral. You've probably heard that. right, wrong, good, bad, moral, immoral, how you should act versus how you shouldn't act. Um, and all of that is within this ballpark of material that we're going to study. Now, you might be surprised to know that there are actually very detailed theories that have been developed in the Western tradition that try to give answers as to what makes an action, on the one hand, good versus bad, right or wrong, something that a person should do versus not do. A lot of us take our own moral guidance from the lessons that we've learned from our parents, from our religious upbringing, if we've had one, or just from our experience in life. But there's a belief within some academic writing that there are standards for right and wrong that can be determined objectively, that they can be somehow known in a way that's universal and binding on all people across time and across space. So we're going to try and study some of these major moral theories. There's definitely a few of them that are out there that have been written about by some great philosophers of the past. And the first one that we're going to study is the moral theory and philosophy of John Stuart Mill, who's a British philosopher of the 19th century. When we wrap up with him, then we will take a look at the kind of rival ethical system of Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher of the 18th century. And they have very different perspectives on what makes an action right or wrong, and you'll be able to sort of judge on your own which of the two, if either, you thought was a little bit more reasonable. Okay, and I'll just tell you, they're the kind of two dominant paradigms in Western academic moral philosophy. So by learning the utilitarian theory of Mill and the Kantian theory of Kant, you'll know a lot about how people consider and conceive of ethics in our Western intellectual tradition, the classics of ethics. Okay, now I want to take it a little slow as we get into this material on ethics, not to rush. So I want to give you guys, first of all, some very basic types of action that do exist within ethics. So there's three main kinds of action in ethics. So some actions are classified as morally impermissible. Other actions are morally permissible. And then there's a third category of the actions that are morally obligatory. So first of all, let me define, and we can talk about it too, and we will. What do you think would be the meaning of saying that an action is morally impermissible? So it's morally impermissible. In other words, what do you think that means? That it's the type of action that is, if it is morally impermissible, any guesses what that could mean? Just your own logic and deduction based on the words, I think, can get you a rough sense. Morally impermissible could mean morally wrong. Yes, so not something you should do exactly. So it's a wrong action. It's an action that's wrong on the morals, in the moral sense. So actions that are wrong, immoral, you could say not okay to do. Even if people do them, they shouldn't be. Okay, so these are actions that are wrong. And in other words, to put it a little simply, not okay to do. Now we're going to define these first, and then we'll try to, generate examples. Okay, so then morally permissible actions, that's kind of the contrary of the impermissible kind. So now already we're kind of off and running, thinking about the first term. This one should be easy enough to define. So if impermissible actions are the ones that are wrong and they're not okay to do, then what do you believe are the definition of morally permissible actions? These would then be, in other words, actions that are what? The second category, the morally permissible would be actions that, in general, are, what do you think? Morally good, okay, or Drew, if you say actions that are right, I agree to a point, but I want to make maybe one little clarification, if I could. So I understand that good is like the natural contrary of bad, or right is the natural contrary of wrong, as we've seen. But it's a little more minimalist than that, and I think, Anthony, you're kind of getting what I'm mentioning. It's just that these are actions which are morally permitted. So I would rather say that they're actions that are not wrong. They are okay to do. Now, some actions that are not wrong are righteous and noble, and they help people, and you could call those good, you know, for sure. But also little things that don't necessarily benefit or burden anybody, but they're just not wrong. Those are also morally permissible. Like, so for example, my shirt that I'm wearing is morally permissible for me to wear, even though you could be a fashion critic and you could say, well, it's not the best shirt he could have worn fashion-wise, but there's nothing wrong with him wearing it. It's not like he's doing something evil or corrupt or immoral by wearing this particular outfit. So, you know, morally permissible means all the actions that are morally okay to do, which includes the things with like a high degree of like virtue, but it also includes things that just don't cross any moral lines. Okay, so actions that are not wrong and they are okay to do. And finally, we get to the third, is morally obligatory. I think the term and the label gives it away. It's a big hint. But what do you think those could be? Morally obligatory actions, in other words, are actions that they go a little bit further beyond than just being permitted, morally permitted, like the second group. What is a morally obligatory action, could you guess? Yeah, Drew, mandatory, one way to put it. The word obligation is in there. So these are actions, morally speaking, that you should do, correct, but more so you must do, and it would be wrong not to do them. Okay, so these are actions that, morally speaking, they're not optional, they're required, or as one has said, mandatory. So morally mandatory, morally obligatory, actions that you must do, and it's not okay to not do them, wrong not to do. Okay. Okay, so there you see 3 different categories of action within ethics: impermissible, permissible, and obligatory. Now, the claim of ethics is that every action that a human being could ever do is going to fit into one of those 3 categories, and it's never more than one. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. If it's obligatory, it's also permissible, but it can't be both impermissible and permissible, or both impermissible and obligatory. Now, our goal as students of ethics now is to try and discover what have some very good philosophers in this field argued in terms of what classifies an action into these various categories. So different ethical theories are different attempts to state conditions under which an action will fall into these various criteria or categories. So let's think about some examples, which I think will probably be pretty easy to come up with. Starting at the top there, morally impermissible. So can anyone think of an action, a type of action, which is going to be an obvious, clear case of being a morally impermissible type of action? What could be such a thing? So you have to think now in your mind of an example of a type of action that is wrong, and it's not okay for people to do it. Whether they do it or not, it's just a wrong thing. Okay, so stealing, that's a good example, Eva. Like when you steal, the definition is you're taking something that you didn't buy without any like legitimate transfer of ownership by the person giving it to you as a gift or some otherwise fashion. So you don't own the item, you take it from someone who does own it, therefore you don't have the right to possess it. That's clearly an impermissible, morally impermissible action. Harming others, Senna, I I like your proposal, and I'm inclined to agree. But, you know, we always have to think about exceptions to a general claim. So I can imagine a case where maybe harming someone as an act of self-defense or defense of others, if they were the aggressor, could be morally justified and morally permitted. But, you know, there are people who are pacifists who say, you know, your obligation is never to do harm. So, I mean, it's not unreasonable to suggest. I'm just throwing out, you know, some cases to contemplate. Drew, lying. Fair enough. Yeah, lying to say something false to another person. Now, I can also dream up scenarios in my mind, or even realistic ones, where lying was perhaps for the best, you know, like preventing some person who wants to harm others from knowing where they could do that would be like an example of misdirecting them through a lie, which would be, in that case, a noble lie. But yeah, for the general case, we rely on truth from each other's statements. Otherwise, we could never have a common world where we trust each other. So yeah, lying is wrong, and we know that the general idea of lying is wrong. Littering, I would agree, yeah. Littering, you know, making a mess in a public place and not cleaning it is a fair example. But there's all kinds of other stuff too. You guys have really just scratched the surface, I think. Murder, rape, torture, genocide. I mean, you know, we can go down the line. There's a lot of stuff that's morally impermissible that no one should ever do, but of course happens sometimes anyway. So that's one category, actions that are morally impermissible. Next, let's talk about morally permissible, okay? What do you think could be examples of actions that are not wrong and they are okay to do? So I would hope, let me say this, I would think this is going to be so easy for you guys to come up with examples of, because this seems like a good moral group of humans that are in this class, all these students. And therefore, I would say probably what? Almost 100% of your own behavior fits right in this category, because you very rarely do things that are wrong. So, okay, Anthony, walking, eating breakfast, goes down fine. I could put pressure on your example if I really, really try hard. I don't know, walking, but maybe walking in an area where you walking harms the safety of others. I can't think of the walking into a restricted area for where it has to remain secure from the public. I don't know. But generally, yes, I know your example doesn't think of all those edge cases. So yeah, like walking, fair enough. There's nothing, no one can say when you're walking on the street, stop that. What a disgrace. You know, you're walking, that's evil. No, but I'm just trying to play around a little. Anthony, that's a good example. Eating breakfast, okay, unless, you know, if you're like eating human beings or something, but for the most part, yes, eating breakfast, as we all understand, is just a normal action that you have to do to survive. Sleeping, unless you're sleeping on the job and your job is to watch for incoming missiles or something, but, you know, for the most part, not a problem to sleep. You're watching this lecture right now, and I don't think that that's evil at all. Even, I mean, you know, it's philosophy, but it's nothing immoral about just taking the class and attending the meeting. So like a lot of things are morally permissible. There are things that are not wrong to do. And it could be like, oh, giving blood, helping an elderly person cross the street, you know, working at the food bank to help, you know, hand out meals to the homeless. That's all morally permissible, sure. But also the minor things that you guys mentioned that don't really harm anybody and that are within your prerogatives to do are also morally permissible. Now, before I jump to the last one, I want to make a quick point, and it's an important point to know. When we talk about morality, I don't want anyone to confuse it with the concept of law. Breathing, Drew, is a funny example. Somehow every time I teach this class, someone makes the case of breathing. But breathing is not an action, my friend, and it has no moral valence whatsoever. You can't choose whether to breathe or not. It's an autonomic response of your nervous system, so it's not a choice. Ethics is about making choices. It's like saying fingernails growing is morally permissible. This is silly. It's not something you're doing, so it's not done based on deliberation. And you can't refrain from doing it without failing to exist and dying, so it's not the right case. But anyway, a point I was about to make is about the difference between law and morality, because they're not exactly the same, although they should and often do coincide. So the reason that they cannot be confused with each other is because sometimes the law itself can be immoral. and sometimes there can be moral actions that are prohibited by law. Okay, so like, for example, can anybody think of any practice which has ever existed, which was ever legal, but we would argue is immoral, whether it's legal or not? Is there something that's ever been legal but was wrong? Let's see if you can think of such an example. Okay, slavery, good example, Sen. I was kind of thinking something like that. So slavery, of course, was a legal institution and in the United States and in other countries for a long time. Drew, if you make the point of death penalty, sure, the death penalty is currently legal, and some do argue against it. So if you believe that it's immoral for the state to be able to execute a person, even for like, heinous crimes, then you would say, well, that's legal, but it's unjustified morally. Like for example, in the Bible it says, "Thou shalt not kill." So there are some religious pacifists who would argue that this is immoral. Abortion is another one. Some people, of course, pro-life, are going to say, to get an abortion is to kill a human being, and it's immoral, even though it's legal and protected in our system. So slavery was the one I thought was the best example first, and then we could talk about Holocaust too. Slavery, owning another human being like property, being able to purchase someone's child and keep them for bondage and servitude that they don't get paid for. I mean, that's a gross violation of human rights, and we all know that. But of course, it was legal in a less enlightened time period in the past. So just because something's legal, I'm just telling you that does not equate in every single case to being moral. And just because something is illegal does not always mean that it's wrong. Like, so if you were Harriet Tubman and you freed the slaves like she did back in the era of slavery in the Underground Railroad, then that was considered a crime and she could have been prosecuted. But of course, what she did was righteous and just, and so the violation of that law was not unjust. The Holocaust, okay, good. So in Nazi Germany, it would have been a crime to give safe harbor to a Jewish person, like, for example, Anne Frank was given safe harbor in the Anne Frank house. But the people who decided to resist the Nazi era in Germany were not like immoral people because they stood against the law. The law itself was what was immoral. So the reason like law and morality can diverge is because when we make laws, we're just human beings and we have our own fallibility and susceptibility to immorality. So we can in fact codify laws that represent things that are immoral. In the best case scenario, we hope that our laws coincide with our shared sense of right and wrong. But of course, it's not always that way 100% of cases. So if law and morality were not different, then there would be no role for civil disobedience, where people say this law needs to be struck down and it's a violation of my sense of right and wrong. Okay, so let's all understand that. People who think that law and morality are exactly the same thing would argue that anything that one does that's illegal has to be immoral too. And anything that you do which abides by the law is therefore automatically moral. But actual moral reasoning is a little bit deeper than that, because the laws take morality as their source of inspiration, not the other way around. The legislators who make the laws have to choose whether they think this would be a good or a bad law to implement. And so when you think about morality and when you think about law, you should think about law as though you were yourself, the legislator, being asked to vote on whether this law should be put in the books or not. The legislator cannot defer to a higher court of authority and say, well, someone voted on it and said it was legal, so therefore it's moral, because they are the voters. So they have to exercise their own judgment. What's something that's illegal and moral? Freeing slaves, like I just said, in the era of slavery. Maybe today you could argue in a hypothetical case, I don't know, stealing to feed one's family if their family is going to die. I don't necessarily agree with that, but like for example, someone might say something like that. Find an example of a law that you think is unjust. Some people find like recreational drug use to be morally permitted, because it's your body and it's your business and there's already legal alcohol. So, if somebody says you can't smoke marijuana, you're going to be penalized under the law. Some would say, well, that's an unjust law. The drugs, it's righteous to do them or something like that. So there's many examples. I'm not pointing out one or the other. Maybe some people think that, owning automatic firearms, which are generally prohibited, is something that you should be able to do. They're very strong Second Amendment people. But, if there's a state law that says it's wrong to do and it's illegal, they might say that law is itself unjust. So there's all kinds of examples that could be given. Okay, now next, morally obligatory then. I want to see if we can think of something like that. So morally obligatory, maybe a little harder at first to come up with, because it's not just something that you may do, but that you must do, and it would be wrong not to. Can anybody think of a case like that, some morally obligatory action? Morally obligatory. If not, I'll help you come up with something, but let's see if there's any initial thoughts on this. What could it be? Welfare. Morally obligatory. Well, I don't know what you mean by welfare, though. Can you expand on that? Because like having a, there's no act. Welfare is not an action. Welfare is a system. You mean to have such a system is a moral obligation? I guess that's what maybe what you mean. Like, for there to be such a system within a society is morally obligatory. Well, I don't know. I mean, there are hardcore, libertarian types, right? Ayn Rand and all that. Like, no, welfare is bad. Having any social programs that are publicly funded is bad. Everyone should just, we have to pay for their own way, and we shouldn't have public funding for roads, for schools. Everything should be privatized. So I don't agree with that, but some people believe that. And if it's going to be morally obligatory, we should have an uncontroversial example. You said I was thinking of something else, but yeah, I was thinking about the system where the poor get some type of money. Yeah, but it's something that is debated. Some people believe that there should be like welfare state. Other people think that there should only be privatized funding for any social goods. So I don't want to put something there that's going to like sound as if I'm biased towards one or the other argument. Something uncontroversial to everybody. A doctor's duty, never take a life. Oh, you mean like the Hippocratic Oath, never do harm? Sure, yeah. Part of being a physician is that you're trying to extend people's lives and health. So if you don't do that, if you don't act with your patient's best interest in mind, then that would be violating a moral obligation. You take that on as a duty. It's not just something that you may or may not do if you feel like it. So that's a fair example. How about this? If you made a promise to somebody to do something, what does that create? Making a promise, saying, you know what, you have my word. I put it on everything, I swear, or something like that. Once you make the promise, now you have created a moral obligation to do what? What does promising lead to? Not even a legal obligation. So once again, not in every case, unless it's a contract. So that reminds us again of the distinct nature of moral versus legal obligations. I can make a promise to somebody to pick them up at the airport to give them a ride when they arrive to LAX. And if I make the promise and I commit to them to do it, then I'm morally obligated to go pick them up. But am I legally obligated to do it? No, because I didn't say, for example, sign a contract with them, and it's not enforceable against me if I just say, never mind, I'm flaking. But flaking in that case does violate the promise, and therefore it's morally impermissible, although legally, of course, it's legal. If the person's calling me at 12 and they're like, hey, you said you'd be here at 12, did you hit traffic? I'm just waiting for you like you promised. And I say, I know you're waiting for me, but joke's on you, because when I said that, I was just lying, and the only reason I did it was so that I could laugh now at the fact that you're stranded at the airport. Ha ha, you just hang up. Now, if you did that, you'd be doing something immoral. Not illegal, though. It's not like the other person can say, well, I'm calling the police, and let's see them deal with you. Since you promised me you would pick me up, you just broke the law. It's not breaking the law, but it is breaking a promise, and that's immoral. So sometimes when you violate obligations like promise keeping, you violated a moral obligation. If someone cheated on their wife or husband after they've exchanged vows, that's the violation of a moral obligation. In some states, I guess it's also somewhere on the borderline of being a legal violation too. But for the most part, no, that's just moral violation. So anyway, one more thing I'd like to point out is that there's a logical connection between this category and this category. And here's the way that is to be understood. You're morally obligated not to do anything that is morally impermissible. So it's morally impermissible to kill or to like murder. So if it's morally impermissible to murder, then you have a moral obligation to what? Let's see if you can put that together. It's morally impermissible to murder. So that means that people are morally obligated to, how does that end? If it's impermissible to murder, then likewise it's morally obligatory to what? if you follow my comment there. You see it in the chat. Impermissible to murder, obligatory to not murder. I don't know about to stop it, Jason, because that might require intervention that puts your own life at risk, which you're not generally obligated to do, but you're obligated at least not to do it yourself, not to murder people. So like, it's morally impermissible to rape, so you have a moral obligation not to rape. And murder, lie, steal, cheat, whatever. Likewise, you're obligated to do these things, and so not doing them is impermissible. So if you're morally obligated to keep a promise, then it is morally impermissible to not keep the promise. So not doing what you're obligated to do is wrong, and not doing what is wrong is an obligation. Okay, so there's that kind of like way of thinking about the connection between the various categories that we see here. Okay, now our goal from here is going to be to try and fill in the blanks as to how is it that John Stuart Mill conceives of morality, and how is it that he provides us with a way of sorting actions into these three different categories. So according to ethical theory, every action that you or I ever do, meaning every deliberate, willful action, not like breathing or fingernails growing, but anything that you do with some intention and deliberateness behind it, is going to be one of these three kinds of things. It's either going to be something that it's okay to do, or that you even have to do, or that you're not supposed to do morally. And so by looking at the action and then the kind of analysis of the moral theory that we have, you can kind of get a sense of when you're doing something wrong or not wrong. Okay, so now we turn our attention specifically to John Stuart Mill and his ethical system and its details. So the first major author on ethics for us is this man. His name is, get it the correct spelling. I always forget, is it with a U or an EW? It's U. Okay, so here's his name, John Stuart Mill, and he lived from 1806 until 1873. And he is the guy who's known as sort of the grandfather of this major ethical system, which we call utilitarianism. Utilitarianism. I know it's kind of a long word, but that's the term of this that refers to his ethical theory. So just a little bit about his biography. You see the dates he lived, 1806 to 1873. He was a very important British philosopher and political economist, and he also briefly served in the British Parliament, which is like the equivalent of Congress that we have over there. So he served in the British government as well, as a member of Parliament, voting on the laws and things. But his most important contribution to the world is his writings in philosophy and in ethics. He's known as the, again, chief proponent of utilitarianism. There are a couple of other historical predecessors before him, also British philosophers of the late 18th, early 19th century, who also discussed the concept, but he, I think, gets the title of the main advocate for the theory because his version of it is the most clear and well written. So anyway, utilitarianism is his theory of ethics. His own views in life were quite interesting. He had a unique combination of views. On the one hand, he would be what we would consider today to be a libertarian politically, meaning that he believed that there should be like very small government and that the government should not have any more power than is absolutely necessary to enforce public order, but not more than that. So government should not be able to overreach into the private lives of its citizens as long as what they're doing does not affect others. So Mill would have been, very laissez-faire about private conduct that's not harmful to others. So he would have been a person who says, allow people to drink if they want, as long as they don't hurt other people. If people want to gamble or seek prostitution or any of those kind of things, then they should be free to do it without government interference, because that's just part of their liberty. and they should be given freedom to do as they see fit as long as it's their own business. So Mill would have believed in all of that, but at the same time, he also had a certain number of progressive views. Like, he was an early advocate for the abolition of slavery and the full emancipation of women to vote. So interesting man, but we're looking at not his political writings, but his ethical writings on utilitarianism. So now I'm going to tell you the very first major idea of utilitarianism, and this is just, getting it started. We're going to talk more about him on Wednesday. What I'd like to say to the class, just so that we know about the schedule, is that one essay I will have to strike off of the list, and that's the essay that was selected for Wednesday, called Extreme and Restricted Utilitarianism by J.J.C. Smart. So to make more room for Mill's work, we're going to occupy Wednesday continuing on the same work of Mill, utilitarianism, and we'll just have to delete from the syllabus the work of J.J.C. Smart, which is not a big deal anyway, because Smart just kind of elaborates on Mill's theory and adds a couple of additional points. But it's more important to get Mill's work himself. So yeah, his first main claim of utilitarianism is this idea. The basic premise behind the whole theory is that you should always act to produce the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So act always to promote the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So that's Mill's principle that he sets down, and he gives arguments as to why this is the correct standard to live by morally. But there you have it in basic, brief detail. It just says you should act in what way? You should always act in this way, to create or to promote the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So basically, if you have a set of options in front of you and you're not sure which one to do, like you have A, B, C, and D, four options, and your thought is, well, I want to do the right thing, so I want to choose carefully between these 4 options to do the right thing. Mill would advise you this way. He would say, well, muchness would be aided for everybody by these 4 options. And whichever one you think would return the greatest amount of total happiness as a consequence, that one is your moral obligation, and all the other ones would be then, in comparison, morally impermissible. So you're always trying to set your course, according to this theory, through the judgment of what action available to you will produce the most overall happiness, not merely for yourself, but for all affected by the action. So as long as you take that in mind when you do your actions and you try to promote the most overall happiness with each action, then you're living a good moral lifestyle and you're doing the right thing. That's how Mill argues. But there's more detail. That's just giving you guys a little preview of the bigger picture of what he's going to say. So I guess we've run to the end then for today's meeting. Thanks again, everybody, for all your great comments and participation and your attendance. I guess from here then I'll just have to wish you guys a good day. See you back on Wednesday, and we'll finish up with the John Stuart Mill. So that's the plan. Sound good, everyone? You guys good on that? And everyone's on the same page? Let me know, hopefully so. Thanks then, and just have a great Monday, and I'll see you guys then back in a couple days. Okay, bye-bye.